So what effect could this fabricated story have on the reporting of actual hate crimes? Joining us now to discuss the story's impact is Ihsan Gardi. He's the executive director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. It's a puzzling case. Thanks very much for coming in to talk about it. What was your immediate reaction when you heard that this 11-year-old girl apparently made up the whole story?
Well, I think like most people, Terry, I had a bit of a mixed reaction. I think first of all, you're relieved that this event actually didn't occur. And then I think it's also, there's some sadness as well. And what would lead somebody, a young girl, to make this kind of a report? You know, when it first came to light, there was an initial sadness that I think many people, and outrage many people felt, as the clip showed. How could this kind of incident happen and happen to a child, any child? And then now that we have it, more details from the story that this incident, according to Toronto Police, did not occur. We're trying to deal with, you know, where do we go from here? There's a kind of concern as well about how this might embolden people who already hold discriminatory views to feel like, you know, they are you know, legitimate and they can continue to promote and promulgate those kinds of views. And at the same time, I think we need to recognize that, you know, this was a child. And a child who made a mistake. And I think it's important that we don't vilify this young girl who's already going to be facing the scrutiny from her classmates and from her family and from the community more broadly.
Why do you think she made it up?
I have no idea. We're not in a position to speculate on it. I think, you know, obviously I don't think she understood the implications of her actions, not just on her and on her family, but on those people who actually do experience these kinds of hate crimes and hate incidents. And that's something that I don't think we can divorce ourselves from the reality, Terry, is that we're living in a time now where, you know, as the clip showed, we're in a different age with social media, where kids are seeing these kinds of messages either targeting their parents or, you know, from classmates or teachers, and we've had reports as well of these kinds of incidents happening, and it has an impact. And we have to ask ourselves a question: how are these kids coping, and how do we help them to deal with this world and this reality that we're living in?
What sort of impact do you think this will have on people who are victims of actual hate crimes? This makes their lives more difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I think that's a genuine concern, and I think, you know, it's something that needs to be addressed. As it is, we know that people who experience hate crimes, generally there's a trend that there's a lot of hate crimes that go unreported. Statistics Canada tells us that up to 2/3 of hate crimes go unreported for a variety of reasons. People feel concerned about retaliation. If it happens in a workplace setting, for example, they might be worried about prospects for advancement or hiring or promotion. So there's a whole host of reasons why people don't report. And if you look at NCCM's data from last year in 2017, we had about 70 incidents that were either reported to us or that we saw in the media. And then about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago on CBC, we had the police chief from Quebec City saying that in Quebec City alone, hate crimes had doubled from the previous year, over 42 incidents, which is more than half of what got reported to NCCM. So again, pointing out the significant problem of underreporting.
You're talking about underreporting, but this was a case of overreporting, wasn't it? It was the exact opposite. This was actually was a case of someone apparently trying to whip up a fear, a phobia, if you like, of Islamophobia, rather than an actual case of it. It was completely bogus.
I see the point you're making, Terry, but I think, again, we have to remember that, you know, this was an 11-year-old child. And I have a 10-year-old, and kids do dumb things sometimes, and we need to recognize that, you know, they don't understand sometimes the full implications of what they are doing or saying. And that's why I think it's important for teachers to have these conversations with their students, for the parents to have the conversation with their kids, because we can't, you know, avoid the reality that this is the world they're growing up in, where we're seeing hate crimes on the rise, and we're seeing online hate on the rise as well. There was a CBC Marketplace report that came out which showed just in January, this past January of last year, that online hate had increased by 600%. Online hate, people using terms that were Islamophobic, racist, homophobic, sexist, etc. Terminology that was Islamophobic had increased by 200%, and right-wing extremist terminology had increased by 300%. And all of our kids have access to technology these days. They're seeing this, so it's going to have some sort of an impact. That's not to excuse the girl, but I think we need to recognize that this is the environment that our kids are growing up in, and how do we help them cope with this? How do we help them deal with this? How do we educate them about the, you know, the gravity of making these kinds of false claims and the impact that it can have, and at the same time make sure that they feel confident that if something does happen to them, they can speak to an adult, they can talk about it, and they can report it.
All right, I thank you very much for taking the time to come in. That's Ihsan Gadi of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Terry.